symbol of excellence in sports entertainment.
Ad-free show subscribers, what is going on? Jon Alba here for a special breaking news impromptu reaction show to the WWE releases that we just got on this Thursday evening as we recorded. I'm joined by a special guest. It's Connor Casey from comicbook.com, their lead WWE writer who's very much in tune with all the happenings in WWE. He's hopping on to discuss this so we can have a little bit of a discussion based around a night that is unfortunately becoming all too commonplace these days, it appears, in WWE. Connor, first off, thank you again for hopping on. And second, what's your initial reaction right off the bat?
Thanks for having me, John. I thought we were done for the year when it came to these waves of releases. And it kind of stopped over the summer. You had the occasional one-off, your Bray, Ric Flair, Greg Hamilton. But I guess it looks like they had one more in store for us. These days always suck just because these are people that, whether you're a fan or you're like us and you're, connected to the business in a way where you are talking to these people frequently and you're seeing where they've come from before they came to the WWE and they get here. And for many of them, it's their dream, only to see them either mishandled or simply not used at all, and then suddenly cut. And the answer given seems to run counterintuitive to the piles of money that are being made and publicly reported on hours beforehand.
Yeah, well,
so there is always frustration there, but sometimes you got to put aside the emotion and just analyze this from a fact-based perspective and go, okay, what really happened here?
Well, to our knowledge, as of recording this on Thursday night, 18 talent have been released. I did report early Thursday morning that I had heard, based off a WrestleVotes tweet, I had heard that there was credence that there would be releases, and I was given indication that there would be some main roster releases as well, in addition to NXT. We've seen this year a lot of the releases came from the NXT side, except for what we saw back in April, where there was a whole bunch from the main roster. 18 names as of now, as of this moment, widely reported by multiple outlets: Frankie Monet, Ember Moon, Scarlett, Oni Lorcan, Karrion Kross, Jesse Kamea, Zeta Ramirez, B-Fab from Hit Row, Trey Baxter, Jeet Rama, Katrina Cortez, Lindsay Dorado, Grand Metalik, Nia Jax, Keith Lee, Mia Yim, Harry Smith, and Eva Marie. There are some big names there, Connor. And I had been made aware of one of these main roster names earlier in the day, but it is not my jurisdiction to report on somebody who has not been made aware that they're about to lose their job. And I didn't have it enough on the record. But when I think of names like Keith Lee or names like Nia Jax, someone who it seemed would be a WWE lifer in Nia Jax, among some other really big names, it really hammers home to me that we have seen a massive shift in ideology from WWE over the course of the past year and a half, where it was once hoarding contracts and there was a lot of talent with nothing to do, whereas now some established names are free to go.
Names that you could theoretically build an entire company around. And it's funny when you look at the independent scene right now, you take this and you take the Ring of Honor news we just got last week.
Brutal.
And to say that the scene right now is full is an understatement. It's engorged. There's talent everywhere now.
And really good talent too.
Oh, so do you want me to get into the theory of why I think some of these bigger cuts happened?
Sure.
I'll kind of walk you through what happened today. So I get off right after the investors call, That's when I'm off my shift.
In which WWE, by the way, reported 200, and I want to get the number exactly right here, $255.8 million in revenue, an increase of 15% or $34.2 million, primarily driven by higher ticket sales and to a lesser extent, venue merchandise sales, resulting from companies' return to ticketed live events, including SummerSlam. That was in quarter 3, of course. So we got this news that this record revenue, or at least rather, I should say, an increase in revenue was reported for quarter 3.
So I think some of these bigger releases were not necessarily financial based. I think they were philosophically based. You mentioned that there is a change in mindset within the company, and I think it goes in much more ways than just, hey, how can we fix this budget line? There's more to it than that. I believe that the big names that have been cut this year, and you can notice it from the big names on this list, how many of them had built up any modicum of a name for themselves elsewhere? And I know when you look at wrestlers in a group and you say, oh, hey, you all wrestled other places, that's like pointing out that, hey, you're all mammals. But follow me on this. You take guys like Keith Lee, Taya Valkyrie, who multiple companies had built their women's divisions around prior. Karrion Kross and Scarlett, Oni Lorcan from his CZW days.
And a very successful product of the New England pro wrestling scene.
Ember Moon, everyone knew at least her finisher for years before she showed up. You look at these people, and then you look at what Nick Khan has been saying publicly in interviews, and you look at the talent that has been brought in recently to the Performance Center. And I believe that they are trying to cut out slowly, and we're seeing it more and more progressively with each of these waves of cuts. They are trying to get rid of any wrestler with any sort of scent of independent wrestling on them. And here's why. I believe that they want everyone to be in-house. They want every single wrestler on their roster to be purebred, homegrown, Performance Center, born, raised on the main roster. That's it. Because then you don't get guys like Jon Moxley, who when they hand you a script and you say, hey, I don't like this, then there's all this pushback. Because if all they know is the WWE system, all they know is the WWE style, both on front of the camera and behind it, they're not going to kick back. And then when those same wrestlers have their contracts coming up and they go, you know, I actually think I'm worth a bit more than this, the officials can turn around and go, okay, go try your hand at independent wrestling, the thing you've never done before. It seems to be a boys club over in AEW where everyone's got to know each other to get in. So good luck trying that, or you can take this contract and stay with what you're familiar with.
I think there's a degree of truth to what you're saying. I've reported this in the past on Twitter at Jon Alba. You can see I've spoken to multiple people about this within WWE, about that change in mentality. If you recall, I was one of the first people to put out reports about the change in NXT that was about to happen. And the ideology of getting rid of that quote unquote indie stink that you're kind of referring to, there is certainly a degree of that. But I also don't think that they're going to turn away a top independent talent if they believe that they check off the boxes that will work within the WWE realm. Who's the best example of that right now? Carmelo Hayes. Carmelo Hayes came into the NXT system. They got a couple real looks at him and they said, okay, this is a guy that will adapt quickly to the WWE style without being quote unquote too indie-rific. And it's pretty evident when you watch NXT 2.0 that Carmelo Hayes is somebody that they believe will be a torchbearer for the company for years to come. And I don't think
he's a great fit.
I don't think many people would disagree with that. He was a legit top talent on the independent scene prior to that. But I think you're absolutely right in that they want people that they can mold from the ground up to fit their vibe. And listen, I don't necessarily think that you can prosecute them for wanting that kind of mentality.
Not necessarily.
It's you compare it to every minor league baseball team or something like that. Like they are talent developing in their own way that they feel will be best for the organization. Now, you can argue, is that the best talent development program? That's up to you to decide. I would argue, I think it's important to have people who have some independent experience. And we talked about on the Kurt Angle show this week, available now on adfreeshows.com as well, about how it does merit to have some knowledge coming into this prior. But I think I agree with you to a degree in that this, and I'm going to tee you up on this in a second, this is definitely putting the finality on everything that we knew as NXT didn't work for what they wanted.
They didn't want the Super Ring of Honor. And we saw more and more examples as the years went on of people that Triple H recognized as being great talents because he scouted them. He looked at them in PWG and Ring of Honor and Impact and New Japan. And he said, I can take this. I can take exactly what you are
and put it in the WWE box.
Maybe a little bit so you know where to look for camera angles. And then put you on TV and just have you butt heads in the same rivalries that I saw you burn the house down with in Reseda. Keith Lee versus Dijak comes to mind. By the way, how did T-Bar escape? Thank God. Like, I wish the poor guy would get his name changed, but I'm glad he's still with the company. And then they would come up to the main roster and Vince would take a look at him and he'd say, I don't see it. I don't see how this fits my vision of what this
and that's exactly the problem, right? There's this miscommunication that, and this is not me reporting anything. I think anyone with a brain can see that there was a lack of translation between the stars that NXT was producing and the stars that the higher ups in WWE had in mind for their company. And that's why we're seeing this shift in mentality. You know, I was talking about this with some talent actually in WWE a few weeks ago. NXT's heyday, which what I think we could say the heyday of NXT is probably like 2015 to 2018, right? Like that's probably the true gold period.
There's like, it jumps up in 14 when you get the original NXT 5 that, you know, your Pac, Owens, Sammy, Finn, and I'm always forgetting the fifth, Kev. I think it was Kev. Yeah. They even did like a list. They were like, here are the NXT 5, and they signed them. And then it was fifth. Then there's a lull in like 16, 17 when they didn't quite know what to do with Joe, Nakamura, and Rude. And then it jumps back up in 18 with your Garganos and Ciampas.
So,
but yes, you're right. Sorry.
So my point is that there was a hole in the market, in the wrestling market, where indie fans wanted to see these great indie talents or talent that were in quote unquote lesser promotions get a chance to be in that big time stage, but still cater to what makes indie wrestling and hot, and that rabid fan base. And Paul Levesque, Triple H, recognized that and catered to make that NXT. The problem is AEW came along and AEW was like, we can do that, but without some of the restrictions that you have in the WWE bubble. And thus, Triple H's vision for NXT became obsolete. That's kind of how I look at it.
Yeah, I think that's fair. It's funny you mentioned, you know, diving over into real sports for a second, because if you look at successful farm systems in baseball, they don't sign talent, send them up from single all the way up through AAA, and then the pro team looks at them and goes, you know what? We just don't need you. So off with you. Go, you know. The successful farm systems recognize, hey, we need this. We need a bullpen. We need great starters. We need some bats in the middle of the lineup. And they go and they look for that talent and they recruit it and they build it and they groom it and they go up with it so that it's a smooth transition from one spot to the next. The bad farm teams are the ones that do kind of what WWE was doing with how NXT was, you know, hey, we'll build this up for you. Here's this great thing I built. And they go, I didn't want that great thing. Be gone with you, or I will put you in a gladiator costume.
So you hope then that this new NXT system will cater to what their vision is for main roster success. Now, again, you reserve the right to disagree with what the main roster should look like. But their mentality clearly is we need to get the hand to become the hand that feeds what we need. So I think you're dead on there with that analogy, but it brings us back to this list of talent that we're told on this Thursday evening that as a result of budget cuts, that they would be getting released. And I have confirmed that, by the way, that is what the talent were made aware by head of talent relations, John Laurinaitis. You go through some of these names. Let's start with the biggest ones. I think personally the most eye-opening releases from this for me are Nia Jax and Keith Lee. Starting with Nia Jax, she was called up. She went through that heyday of NXT, but she fit that WWE mold. There was nothing indie-rific about her in any way. She fit the WWE mold, gets the call up, is pushed in a big-time role in WWE. This is someone who has been in a WWE Women's Championship match at WrestleMania. She looked different. She's not like most girls, right? Nope. And yet here she is on the shelf right now and then gets released. What are your reactions to Nia Jax, who herself has been involved in a few forms of controversy in the past? What are your thoughts on her getting released here?
Shock, just because of her family connections, and that alone making me think, yeah, she'll stay as long as she wants to. But you have to wonder with her if this was a matter of, if we're looking to cut, who's somebody that seems to get into scraps on TV and also deals with injuries and maybe quite isn't worth the trouble that we're enduring for her.
And we don't know if that's the case. I don't want to speculate, but it's a question worth asking, I think, given the public history that is well documented. I mean, this stuff is not behind the scenes
Becky,
stuff.
Charlotte,
this is well documented
Bailey,
stuff.
like Alexa, like there have been injuries. Like I think I was Ollie Davis that like listed all of the injuries that she's accidentally done, usually through no fault of her own, other than just like not knowing her own strength. It's unfortunate.
She definitely was the most surprising name on this list for me. I did not.
It wasn't for me. The next name you're going to name is the most surprising.
Keith Lee is more surprising too at this point.
Keith Lee is more surprising.
I thought with how Keith Lee's career has taken a turn in WWE, I honestly, and I hate to talk like this, but I felt like something like this was inevitable, and it upsets me to think like that, because I think Keith Lee is one of the most exceptional live performers I have ever seen in my life. And Chris Hero actually talked about that on our series that we had with him here on Ad Free Shows, Can Chris Hero Save Wrestling, where he mentioned that Keith Lee is one of the greatest live performers he's ever seen. And I think of the reactions that he got when he went toe-to-toe with Roman Reigns, when he stepped in the ring with Brock Lesnar,
big fella.
It seemed like he would have checked all the boxes off for Vince McMahon. But here we are after a repackaging and some time off due to injury or illness, I should say. Yeah. And here he is released.
See, I thought and he had talked about this in recent interviews, the heavy involvement in the repackage that Vince had made me think Vince is not going to dedicate his time to something that he's going to release in 3 weeks. He just wouldn't. He'd recognize this is not worth my time. I'm going to go do something else. I'm a busy guy.
But we have also heard stories like on our Something to Wrestle shows and other shows that we have that sometimes people are flavors of the month as well. And then they get tired of him, and that's sad.
Maybe, but he had been Bearcat for 3 weeks and only wrestled for 2 of them. That's the frustration. The thing with Keith, and I think I've said this elsewhere, he is the only wrestler in this generation that reminds me of John Cena.
Charisma-wise?
There is something about his charisma, his strength, his ability to go from jovial to incredibly serious on a dime.
I'll tell you what I think it is. And I can't remember who it was, but it was after he put the Twitter video up where he was explaining what happened with his illness. There was a Hollywood writer or director that was like, this is a guy who could be a crying parent in a movie. He could make you feel something. And I think that's what it is with Keith Lee. Audiences connect with him and they empathize with him. And I don't feel that was tapped into enough with him on the main roster.
Not at all. And we can't control what happened regarding his health. Like, that was just purely unfortunate.
Sure.
And thank God he got through it. I was just happy he was back. Like, when people were speculating over what's wrong and knocking on his Twitter, asking him, like, look, he'll tell you when it's time. This is obviously something, or else he would just say, oh, my neck's hurt, or I broke my arm. This was obviously serious by the way he was protecting it. And then when he comes out and says what it was, you're like, holy crap, this was worse than anybody could have possibly just guessed. And the fact that he was back was a relief. And I thought, you know what? There is too much talent, too much charisma, too much emotional connection between him and fans whenever he gets in front of a live crowd for him to not eventually be recognized and get that big push that we were all expecting. So yeah, that one stings. I already tweeted it. I know the joke. So-and-so to AEW confirmed.
We'll get into that in a little bit, because I want to talk about
and I'm sure
long-term ramifications of some of that. His fiance, Mia Yim, someone who was involved with one of the more controversial stables in WWE history, Retribution, not all that successful. It's a shame. She's incredibly talented. She was a shining star for me in Impact, and I thought she had a really nice run in NXT as well for the most part. And then she is unfortunately cut here.
I believe I saw the stat she had not wrestled this year.
No, she had not. So this is a pairing that I think if you were to say 6 months ago that this would be the case, everyone would say this is absolutely insane. But given how things have played out on television, I don't think it's terribly surprising, unfortunately. Karrion Kross and Scarlett let go here. Karrion Kross, just a few months ago, was NXT champion. He was, if you recall, WWE backstage when that show was running. He was touted when he was signed. It was put on the show as breaking news as like a major acquisition by the company. He had been Killer Kross prior to that in Impact and on the independent scene. He comes in treated like a megastar right away in NXT. Huge entrance. Scarlett fills out the act and he gets the big run. Seems like something starts to fizzle a little bit towards the end of his NXT run. At least maybe that was my perception of it. He gets the call up and he's a totally different character with different presentation. Scarlett never appears on the main roster. And now they are both released. That's got to be a pretty eye-opening situation and kind of relates back to what we were talking about before with the hand and what it feeds.
The treatment of Karrion and Scarlett, I think, will be 10 years from now. People will still be looking at this.
So I said it's got to be one of the biggest what ifs of the last 10 years.
And just going, what went wrong here and why? And I think it might wind up being one of the last big examples, like you said, of here's NXT building this thing up and Vince going, this is not what I want, go away.
What's amazing about it is the way NXT built him seems like it would have checked all the boxes for Vince McMahon. Does it not?
It absolutely. And my issues with Karrion were always, I felt like I was in the minority with a lot of the criticism I had for him. I felt like everything really went downhill from the one promo Johnny Gargano gave him where he just said, you suck. I think it was building up to the In Your House event or the one-on-one they had. I felt like as the act went along, some of his weaknesses were shown.
Were exposed. 100%. I agree with that entirely.
Outside of the Finn Balor matches, because I think Finn can work with anybody. You saw where the weaknesses lied, and you thought, you know what? These are weaknesses that the main roster might just simply not care about.
Yeah, because he shouldn't have been wrestling big, long matches on the main roster anyway.
And, he's a big dude, and he could just use that size, but in NXT, that's just not the right fit because nobody's that size, and they're all working a completely different style that doesn't necessarily mesh well with his. It's the Baron Corbin thing again from years prior. Not using Scarlett always baffled me. The Gladiator gear was like, this was,
and first impressions matter. He lost in 2 minutes to Jeff Hardy in his first match on the main roster.
Oh, and I loved all of the excuses that came out that day. Wait
Let
for
it
it to
play
play
out.
out.
Let it
Jeff
play out.
Hardy's
That's my
a big
favorite
deal.
my
Are you
favorite
doubting a
tweet
former
that I
WWE champion?
My favorite tweet that I get when some bad example of booking happens, regardless of the company, whether it's WWE, AEW, MLW, Ring of Honor, whatever it is, let it all play out is my absolute favorite tweet that I get, Connor.
And now my response will be Karrion Kross was fired months later.
He was another guy I got with play it out. Let all play out all the time. That's always one I got.
Yeah.
It's just quite crazy. I mean, Karrion Kross is someone that I think everyone viewed as a home run and an automatic success in WWE, and just wasn't meant to be, which is really, really crazy. Going through this list more, B-Fab just called up with Hit Row. To me, she was a really important part of that group as a fabric. She kind of was like glue and was filled out that missing piece. I think she had a little bit of a way to come as far as in-ring action, and who's to say whether that or not that would have translated on the main roster, but she seemed like she still could have very much been utilized as a valuable piece in that act. Now, I understand that when you have people who are sitting on the sidelines and you're not doing anything with, you may feel inclined to cut them. B-Fab is someone who's just introduced to TV and has been featured on TV.
And was such a big part of that group's presentation.
Yeah.
That it felt bizarre that even if she wasn't necessarily the one that was going to be wrestling every week, and based on how she was using NXT, wrestled very seldomly, I still feel like if that's part of the package, if that's part of the group's design, you keep her, because that entrance music now is forever going to have her singing Hit Row.
It's
and she's not there.
It's a tough thing to get around. Absolutely. The Lucha House Party Grand Metalik and Lince Dorado, who, according to multiple outlets, requested their releases earlier.
Had been unused for majority of this year. So.
Lince, first of all, Grand Metalik, incredibly talented. Lince Dorado, one of the cooler dudes I've ever interviewed. And I think Lince Dorado will have a lot of success on the independent circuit. Harry Smith, who was brought back earlier this year and then never used. So that's I guess a footnote. Eva Marie, who had been brought back earlier this year, had been given months of vignettes, had the SummerSlam championship match with Alexa Bliss, became Dewdrop's protege for a hot second, and has been out of action for the past month and a half or so.
Which was reportedly for a movie. Wasn't even, so the injury was a write-off.
So pretty much cutting the loss on that investment. Yeah. That was her second tenure in WWE. And I'm going through the list again. I'm pretty sure that's it as far as the main roster cuts here, going through some of the NXT ones. The biggest name I would venture to say was Ember Moon. Ember Moon, someone who, again, a product of that first NXT system, pretty successful, a women's champion in NXT, had some great matches. Her first WWE main roster experience was a call-up in the Royal Rumble. Has a run on the WWE main roster, never really quite takes off, gets hurt in a 24/7 segment, injures her Achilles.
Yep.
Then
Jason Carmella.
Then is sent back down to NXT, has some tag title reigns, gets to wrestle a little more, and that's that. And truthfully, if you were to ask me, of these cuts, who is the one person that I think it's like a guarantee will show up in AEW, I think that answer is Ember Moon, in my opinion. I think she's someone who can add a lot to a women's division, wherever that may be. And it seems like, and I don't love speculating right off the bat when someone gets released, because it doesn't really feel entirely fair, but it seems like that's kind of a Ruby Soho situation where I think Tony Khan will be the type of guy to recognize that she is a talent that, yes, we've added a lot of talent lately, but she is someone who can make an immediate impact, especially as we add a secondary title here.
She's someone you can make a pillar of a division. It's funny that they kept talking about the pillars of AEW being those 4 young guys. You bring in Ember, she's a pillar of any division she's in. So yeah, I'm there with you. That is a smart call. It felt like they never really knew what to do with, and we'll say about so many of these. It felt like they didn't know what to do with her on the main roster. They didn't quite get they were smart enough to at least know, hey, put her in the ring and watch her go. But they didn't know what to do with her otherwise. The package kind of looked like, is she a werewolf? What's with the hood? Like, it was always a moon thing going on. The eye context, like, they didn't really know.
She's a moon, pal.
She's don't let that Moonfall movie that's coming out next year. It's like it's like the guy's just gonna throw the moon at you this time after making White House down.
Continuing, Frankie Monet, who
6 matches, Jon Alba. 6 matches. That is how many matches she wrestled.
And as you said, someone who very much has been invested in the past in other companies and feels like someone that should have clicked in the WWE bubble. But
that was one of the first to drop. Because I was pulling into the parking lot at the gym as these were coming out. That was one of the first, and I just went, really? You didn't know what to do with her? Did she not want to go up? Did she not want to stay? Did you not know what to do with her? Like, baffling with that one.
Continuing with this list, Oni Lorcan, who I thought Lorcan and Birch with Pete Dunne was a great package. Again,
NXT.
Is Oni Lorcan the greatest TV wrestler? I don't know, but I think he's a hell of a professional wrestler, and he will kill it on the independent scene. He was very successful on the independent scene, especially in New England. I believe he's a network product, and Biff will come back out there. And he's the type of guy I could see doing a whole bunch of one-offs and a bunch of different promotions, going in there, just having killer matches in Japan and AEW for a one-off and MLW. Like I could see this kind of guy popping up everywhere.
ECW is going to love him.
Sure, someone like him. He's very talented. He had a nice little run. He honestly had a longer run than I thought he would have had there. And
6 years.
And because he looks different, and I think that he's a really talented guy that a lot of people would benefit from giving a look at. And Jesse Kamea, Zeta Ramier, Trey Baxter, also known as Blake Christian, one of the more talented individuals that was on the independent scene, scouted by WWE, brought in about a year ago. And
it felt like less. I thought it was like February.
It might have been less. It's very possible. Kind of went the 205 live route, then didn't get a whole lot of opportunities in NXT.
Mm-hmm.
Very talented, very, very talented, and the type of guy who can go in there and have a match with anyone. I have no doubt he will assimilate right back into the independent culture and be just fine there. Jeet Rama, who, if I'm not mistaken, didn't he have a match on that India special that they did? I'd have to go back and look. They never got too much TV time. Katrina Cortez, who had a hot second run on the main roster with Sin Cara, and then that was the end of that. At least I'm pretty sure that's what happened. I want to make sure of that before I go ahead and say that. But these numbers just continue to pile up here, Connor. We've seen it non-stop. It was Katrina. I was right about that. We've seen it non-stop this past year and a half, just these cuts, these talent cuts. There are going to be people who are going to rightfully say, well, you can't keep everybody. And that's fair.
Yeah.
That's accurate, especially if they don't fit your vision for what is going forward. Not everybody is going to have TV time all the time. It's just the reality of the situation. The flip side of that is that, as we said, generally speaking, this company is recording massive record-breaking profits across the board. Even coming out of the pandemic, still doing big numbers. And some of the talent released feel like names that could have been a lot more. So it's this weird feeling of uneasiness at the end of the day.
It is, but to me, nothing has stung worse than it was April 15th, 2020, where we had that long list of releases. And that hurt because it was right as the pandemic was starting and these people had nowhere to go. There were no other options. The only other company that was operating at the time was operating out of an empty amphitheater down in Jacksonville. And we'll say this over and over, they could only bring on so many people.
Right.
And they didn't really pick up many of the people that got dropped then.
At least on a permanent basis. And keep in mind that WWE also just made corporate cuts and office cuts this past week as well. Longtime senior vice president, Stan Stansky, who was heavily involved with the aesthetic look and the creative look of WWE, reportedly let go. These cuts are coming across the board in a lot of different areas as these big revenue numbers come in. And I just think that, again, you can have your opinion as to whether, well, they don't need all these people or, oh, it's really awful that they're doing this. But the reality is it must be said that these big numbers are coming in. This company is making a lot of money right now. They are looking to maximize their profits, call it for what it is. That's exactly the situation. And the thing that I think just doesn't sit well with a lot of people is that these cuts came minutes after the Q3 earnings call. Minutes afterwards. So you can't have questions about them from investors. And the fine print has been put out there at that point.
So, truth be told, I have listened to enough of those investor calls to where I don't think those questions would have been asked anyway.
Probably not.
Like nobody from Goldman Sachs is calling in to go, hey, why'd you get rid of Keith Lee?
No, I don't think you would get questions like that, but I think that there would be questions of, hey, why were all these talent released at once? I think that's a plausible thing that could be asked.
Maybe.
Depending on who the investor is, of course. But it's just optically.
Right.
It's,
like WWE and optics. I don't think that has ever stopped them from doing certain things.
Of course not.
What was the last pay-per-view that just happened?
Certainly.
And where did it just happen?
Certainly. So it's unfortunate. I can't state this enough. I fully understand that you can't hoard talent. WWE put themselves in that situation where they were hoarding talent for several years, and now you're getting the fallout of the unfortunate fallout of that. But a lot of these names that we talked about on this show were people who were actively being used in programming.
Raw is empty now. And it was already being treated like it was empty, but you just cut most of their mid-card.
Yeah. It's really crazy to think that guys like Keith Lee, who were just at the top of NXT, and Karrion Kross, who were at the top of NXT, are now without jobs. And we can wrap this show by, if you would like to throw out some potentials of where someone like this would be a good fit, by all means, go ahead. Again, I don't feel super comfortable being like, this company should sign this person right now, this should happen and whatnot. But it's obviously fun to think, oh, well, what would a Keith Lee AEW run look like? What would a Keith Lee run in New Japan look like right now? Or anything like that.
Where I am reassured is in the fact that the independent wrestling business is healthy right now.
And these names that will hit will help make it even healthier.
And that talent will be recognized and it will be picked up somewhere.
100%.
Whether that is AEW, whether that is MLW, whether that is Impact, New Japan Strong, New Japan Proper, the UK Indies, WXW over in Germany. Like, there are options and people will have places to work. That is where I find reassuring. Any of these guys, especially the top tier ones we've named at the top of the list, they'll be just fine. They will go somewhere else. They will get picked up, some with a quickness. So I'm not too worried. I was worried when the April cuts happened last year, because that was very much we don't know how long this pandemic is going to last. We don't know when Impact or Ring of Honor or New Japan are going to be able to start operating again.
Indies aren't running. Nobody has anywhere to work.
Options. Right. Now you do. Now you have GCW every week. Now you have Impact tapings in Vegas and here. Whatever's going to happen with Ring of Honor. And then obviously, of course, there's the big one, AEW. Now, there obviously you look at the big names and you go, AEW should gobble them all up. They won't. They haven't. If you actually look at the list of people that they have brought in over the last year, it's not a 1-to-1 match of who WWE let go.
And some have been brought in, and I'm sure this will happen for one show, two shows.
Those tier 1 contracts. It's like, hey, you get this for a one-off appearance, and
which is healthy for pro wrestling, by the way. It's very healthy to have systems like that.
Right. And it's why I feel like it's one of the many ways AEW is able to establish itself as the center of the non-WWE wrestling universe. It's the fact that not only do they let wrestlers come in for these one-off appearances, they just decided, hey, we'll work with everybody. The proverbial forbidden door is open to everyone. It's a brilliant business decision on Tony Khan's part. I know the moment I say that, I'm getting 5 very negative comments on Twitter, because some of y'all just hate when he breathes. But as far as the people that got cut today,
it's a tough day, man. It's quite frankly, it's shitty. It's really shitty. And yeah. I got a couple texts as we were taping this, actually, from some WWE talent, and I got 2 that said the exact same thing. So sad, period. And yeah, that's from 2 main roster WWE talents as we were taping this. So
those are your comrades. Those are people that you have, not only are you beating each other up in the ring 4 to 5 nights a week, but you're also on the road with them. And that's what stings, This too will pass. Of course. It stings now. It sucks. So many of these people will find success elsewhere, and the world will keep going. And like you said, this only helps make what is becoming a thriving independent scene even bigger. And, a couple years ago, it looked like WWE was going to wipe out the independents with one swift stroke by essentially running them themselves.
Yeah.
By taking NXT UK and partnering up with Progress and ICW and saying, hey, we now run UK wrestling. And you saw what happened to the Brit
going to Japan.
Who talks about Brit Rest anymore the way we did in 2015? They were going to do it with NXT Japan. I still don't know how that was going to work, just given the history of that country and the different wrestling companies and how long they've stuck around, to where you thought you were really going to pillage All Japan and New Japan all at once. Good luck, I guess. I thought that one was a fool's errand. They were going to try it down in Mexico. They were going to try it down in Brazil. You saw that. I remember that big map of Triple H giving that presentation, and there was one in India, and I think they had one in Africa. Like that was going.
It was an NXT takeover.
That was
quite literally.
We always joke we're in the darkest timeline. That's the darkest timeline, because then everything is under WWE. Then they are literally the Disney of pro wrestling, because there is no other option.
So I'm so glad you just said Disney, because I want to bring up this last point here as we wrap things up here. Chatting with Connor Casey from comicbook.com. Stephanie McMahon has made the comment multiple times about WWE being Marvel. Mm-hmm. And you get invested in these branded characters that are larger than life and all that stuff. Mm-hmm. With what we've seen from releases in the past year and a half, where there is a message being sent, at least this is as far as I see it, there's a message being sent that you can invest in someone as a fan. You can invest in someone's path through NXT and get excited about them. You can invest in someone's debut on the main roster and get excited about them. You can invest in somebody having a short little main event run or a championship run on the main roster and get excited about them. But at a moment's notice, for the budget cut reasoning, they can be gone. And that's where it just feels different than a Marvel to me, because Marvel's not going to pull the plug on a character that is having success and is being well received by the public for the sake of a budget cut. Now, they're obviously a little different circumstances, but I think my point resonates.
Purely if we're talking purely the MCU, you're dead on. In comics, it's a little different. You know,
I know, but my
moment
point,
of sales
it's not,
start dipping on a series. I
know
where you're going.
Brand. You could, it doesn't have to be Marvel. You could plug in a different brand. That's
comic books in general. Like, I actually just talked with Michael Kingston from Headlock yesterday. I got an interview with him coming out. Name drop. And I just thought, like, there are so many connections between the comic book, you know, just that whole process, that world that gets established, and pro wrestling. She's not entirely off with making the comparison.
Point is, you invest in these characters.
There you go.
And you now have to come to the realization that they are just part of a machine that can be pulled at any moment. Where in 2002 WWE, there were cuts. People were, I can't make this, people were cut. 100%. It happened all the time. But these names that were given legitimate investment into, that fans are pillaging their money for to throw at them, that wasn't happening. Whereas now this sort of thing seems to be a little more commonplace. And there's going to be people who disagree with me on that, and that's fine. That's just the way I see it.
It is one more reason why it is harder to invest in WWE programming. It is hard to watch Raw each week and feel like you are investing your time wisely. Because
the stars, you can invest in the stars, but the stars are never going to be bigger than the brand. Whereas 20 years ago, there was very much a chance for the star to be bigger than the brand. Stone Cold Steve Austin, The Rock. I mean, The Rock became 75 times bigger than a brand than WWE could have ever hoped to be. And that's just the reality. So whether they cognitively or just inherently have decided that that's no longer going to be the process, that's the reality. AEW is not going to be able to produce a star to that magnitude yet, because it's such a new company still, and there aren't as many eyes on pro wrestling as is. So it seems like an era that is totally gone, and it's, in my opinion, never coming back.
And based on what we've seen in AEW, I don't think they would push back if a star did become bigger than the company. They would just let it ride and say, you know what? If Kenny Omega is so big that he walks in and you go, oh, I know that is Kenny Omega, not, oh, AEW World Champion Kenny Omega. Tony Khan's going to just put his arm around him and go do your thing. I don't get the impression he's going to pull back and pull on the reins with.
But again, I worry about the ramifications that the biggest brand in the industry is not allowing for stuff like this to happen. And I worry that hurts the industry as a whole.
Maybe.
I hope I'm wrong. I hope I'm wrong.
But I don't think the reason the independents are thriving, it almost feels disconnected from what WWE is doing. I make this line now that I cover sports entertainment on Monday nights and I cover professional wrestling on Wednesdays, because it really does feel like two different businesses.
Yep.
They're sisters, but they're different. And they treat the process differently. If WWE died tomorrow, I don't think the pro wrestling world dies with it. It changes, for sure. The face of it changes. The trajectory of it might change, but I don't think it dies.
That's an interesting concept. But it might, just my point being here, that it makes getting invested in stars much more difficult when routinely we are getting mass cuts like this to people who are being featured on TV. So,
but even when they are being featured on TV, hey kids, do you like 6 weeks of rematches? No? How about distraction
Well,
finishes?
that's
Does
another.
that not do it? What
that's
about the
another
almighty
conversation.
roll-up finish? Because that is the most devastating move in all of sports entertainment.
That's a conversation for another time here on ad-free shows, and I'm sure you'll be talking about stuff like that over on comicbook.com. If you want to give a quick plug for your stuff, Connor, by all means, go ahead.
You got it. As he said, I cover all things professional wrestling and sports entertainment over on comicbook.com. You can also see some of my reviews. I'm reviewing comics weekly, the occasional video game once I get to PS5, even more of those. You can find me on Twitter over at Connor Casey CB. Got that blue check mark finally. Instagram at the same spot. That's mostly my gym photos and whatnot. I'm still working on that blue check mark, but it is a fun follow. And yeah, you can also find me on the Comic Book Nation podcast. I pop in every now and then, and I'm got a pretty good feeling I'll be popping up there pretty soon. If not for this, we got some full gear to talk about next week.
And even so, you got some great comic takes, and that's all I care about. I mean, that's half the time I text you about what's going on with the Batman, so that's cool with me. So
oh yeah, and trust me, I will be all for that once.
Absolutely. Well, we appreciate you hopping on here, Connor. We appreciate all of you guys subscribing adfreeshows.com. You get content like this and a whole lot more. You get the one-on-one series that I do, AFS on YouTube.com, and bonus content from all of our programs here in the Ad Free Shows family. Appreciate you guys watching. We'll see you next time.